me, it's not about so much about achievement, it's about the mastering of your craft. And the achievement just comes naturally on its own as you're working on the process and working on the skills and working on yourself to be the best version of yourself. The results actually come when you do that.
It is my pleasure to introduce someone that has absolutely impacted my life. And actually, when I met him, it was at the Grand American in Utah because the Milwaukee Bucks were in preseason playing the Utah Jazz. I happened to go to the game that night, but this guy, Corey Shelley, that introduced us, in the middle of my comedy set for 20 Billionaires, got up and left. And then he goes, "I'm sorry, man, my coach, the guy that helps me out in my business, he was introducing me to Giannis." I said, "All right, I'll take that. That's a pretty good excuse. Like if I could meet Giannis, I might have walked out on Corey's speech for sure." Dr. Craig Manning, you'll hear, originally from Australia, was a professional tennis player, then figured out that he was even better at coaching, taking someone that might be number 8, number 9, and getting them way up the ranks, find out what they were truly best at, more importantly, have them find out what they're truly best at, and help to dissect in the brain scientifically what's actually going on so they could upgrade their performance when it mattered most. And so this isn't something that Craig's just done for people like Giannis, who is, by the way, a 2 times MVP since you've been working with him, and win a championship. You know, they won the NBA championship and he won the MVP of that as well. So I know you do a lot of work with him. I hear him quote you from time to time as well. You've also worked with the Cleveland Cavaliers when they won the entire thing and came back from the most insurmountable odds against the best regular season team in history. But you know, you did this in tennis. You've done it in other places, BYU. As well. So, but he's also done this for companies like Red Bull and Lululemon. I always would look at these little sayings on Lululemon, and then one day I'm being coached by Craig, and he's telling me this story, and I'm like, "Oh, that's like those sayings on Lululemon." He's like, "Yeah, they're one of my clients." I'm like, "Oh, it all makes sense." So, so yeah, I mean, it's an honor to introduce everybody to you because I feel like you are the world's best at this. This is something that you've dedicated your life to, and that might be subjective, and you know, you might say, well, but like when you look at the results that you've gotten over and over, and me being able to implement what you're teaching as a performer, as just in life in general, especially after I finish anything, I'm like, what are the 3 things I did great? And what's the one thing that I could do a little bit better with, or that I could improve? Or the statements that I write every morning into the drawer by the side of me here. I've got my statements about being fully expressed, that I've got this, that I'm never alone. I've got all these things that you've helped so that my brain functions in a way that's optimized and performs in such a great way. And you're just an amazing human being. You're just a really great person who happens to be extraordinarily skilled at what you do. And so I'm looking forward to talking with you today, interviewing you, and having people hopefully have never met you get to learn a little bit about you and some of the things that you teach. So a little bit of a long introduction, but well deserved.
Thanks, Garrett. Appreciate it. Love chatting with you. You say it. I love how well you articulate just what goes on there behind the brain. So yeah, love it. It's fun. Thanks, mate.
Like the difference between you and I is I might have an idea and I'm like, this sounds really great. If you have an idea, you research and you figure out the science behind it and then prove that out. And so I love how much research that you've done. And then you're testing that when the stakes are the very highest. I mean, you work with the Milwaukee Bucks right now, and how crazy. I mean, that's a small market team. People are not picking this team to be, you know, hey, this is going to be the NBA championship Milwaukee Bucks team. And then even the fact that, you know, we watched videos together when Kevin Love was just going off and scoring the most in a quarter, you know, a first quarter, and you know, from game to game, doing this work. So like, this is when stakes are pretty high because there's a lot of eyeballs on these games. There's a lot of people with judgments and opinions more than ever. And to navigate that from a person's psyche, I mean, where do you start and how did you even get into this?
Yeah, I love, for me, like you said, coaching. I still like to call myself a coach, but it's the operation. Got to say this the right way. It's operation. operationalizing it, right? Operationalizing it, turning it into action. It's the how, and breaking it down so you can actually teach people to do it. That to me is the biggest challenge. And that's why I'm always researching it and trying to break it down to the application. And so that it's repeatable, so that we can do it all the time, so that we can help people be consciously competent. And as we do that, we can build that predictable human performance and help them just to take it to another level. So to me, if we can break it down to the pure action of what they were doing and capture what that is, now we can turn that into a skill and get it habitualized in the subconscious so it becomes a part of them. We've just changed the actual disposition of the person. We've increased their skills, so now they can do that almost automatically now moving forward. And if they can't do it automatically yet, we turn it into a skill to help them to focus on it so they can execute it until it does become a part of them and get it in this and get it to become a habit there. So it's really truly is mapping the brain and creating patterns in the brain that help to accelerate their performance. And like you said, also, I love testing it at the highest level, because if it doesn't stand up there, then it's hard to, I don't want to teach it to everyone else if it's not really going to stand up for them. I really want to make sure this stuff really does work. So I'm always testing on myself. I have certain clients I tested on at the highest level to make sure it's really accurate, so that we're teaching stuff that really is going to stand the test of time, help people get better. Yeah, the NBA is such a good opportunity to, there's so much pressure to see if it really does stand. You know, it's whether it's valid. We always use the language, validity and reliability. Is it valid? So is it really real? So that's doing your research accurately. And then reliability, testing it under pressure to see if it's going to stand that test. And that's where you find truth. So I love doing the research.
So are you allowed to talk about this Cleveland Cavaliers season where they were down 3-1 to the Warriors, and they came back, and what was going on, and what the difference was, and what the work you were doing?
Yeah, I'm allowed to. I need to always be careful and not use specific people's names, because unless they've given me approval to use their name, but I can talk about the teams and talk about in a little more general terms. But yes, we were down 3-1 against the Cavaliers, and when I was working with the Cavaliers, we're down 3-1 against the Warriors, and we had been doing so well, but we had changed, the team had changed their strategy going into the series, which I have no control over that. I'm not one of the coaches or the GM or anything, but I had talked to the guy there that I was working directly with and was consulting with, that was in the administration as well as working with some of the athletes. And I was like, no, this is wrong. This is going against what we've been doing to get to this point. From the time they brought me in, we'd turned the mindset around from reactive to proactive. That's super general, but it was a lot more complex than that. But in a nutshell, that is a 180-degree switch, right? I don't think people always understand. That is a massive change of mindset. And we changed the mindset, and we were the hottest team, finishing out the second half of the season. And we go into the final championship, and we decide that we need to shut down a couple of their players on the team, which is fundamentally reactive, which switches everyone back into the reactive mindset. And I had tried to talk to them, explain to them the science of, well, this is fundamentally flawed from a psychological standpoint. But they were adamant that's what they needed to do, and they went off and lost 3 out of 4 games. And so the science was proven to be right again. When you're reactive, you're not going to process as quick. And we have the science. When you're reactive, you're processing at best at 600 milliseconds per thought in comparison to 200 milliseconds. That's a 400 millisecond difference. In an NBA at that level, that's going to dramatically impact your performance. And the science was proved to be right again. We're down 3-1. So then I went to bed that night a little bit down, thinking what was the point in working with these guys, and woke up the next morning a little more assertive and like, I'm going to consult. That's what I do. That's my job. So I'm going to consult. So I call up this individual that was higher up within the organization, and we got into an argument, and I was just standing up for the science. Honestly, Garrett, I was just like, no, this is what the science says. I'm not trying to be right. I'm just standing up for the science. And I kept trying to support it with ideas. One was around chess playing, using that as an example. If you always react, you're always a move behind, and your best outcome is you just elongate not losing. That's not playing to win. And the other example was when we're so worried about what our opponents are doing, you cannot be aware of yourself at the same time. Hence, you're losing your identity and you're not going to play to your strengths. And he used an example of what do you mean by that? And say, well, what's LeBron's strength, for example? And he said, driving to the hoop, getting fouled. And he kind of did this thing like, well, of course, that's obvious. I'm like, yes, but how often has he done it? And he just went deathly silent, because we don't realize when we're worrying about others, we're reactive and we're losing our awareness. If we're always playing not to lose, we're in a reactive state of mind, it's going to impact everyone's performance, whether you like it or not. So eventually, after several times, he dropped the F-bomb on me, and which is fine, but it got heated a couple of times. But I just kept trying to stay calm and just state the facts, the science. Finally, this guy said, okay, I guess what I try to do is win people over through good logic and science to prove the point. And finally, he was like, okay, what do you want us to do? And I'm like, okay, first we got to stop talking about the opposing team. And Harry Potter was big at the time. I'm like, that got to be the team that must not be named. Let's focus on us first. We got to be proactive versus reactive, and being super general is more specific. And we got to play to our strengths. And they called a meeting. They did it. They did everything we talked about. Ended up coming back, winning 3 games in a row and winning the NBA championship. So it was a big switch back in mindset. Yeah, it was pretty fun to see the science work at that level.
I feel like a lot of things out there are pretty general in the conversation of mindset, and mindset gets diminished because of that. It's like, oh, you got to have, and so to add the element of science and how to work the programming of the mind for that mindset, because if we're viewing from a playing not to lose mindset and in reaction, we know those are going to be fairly limited results. But when people are struggling, or when people are frustrated, or where people think, oh, that person's lucky, or they're just gifted, or they were born that way, or they just had a different family and upbringing, there's a lot of blame and victimhood that comes in. But what you're taking in is in dissecting, like in a frame by frame process and structure, how to actually train the mind that leads to these outcomes and results. And you've done that in sports and in business. So
yeah, Garrett, I love what you're saying. Is I just never bought into what you're saying there. From the time I was a young kid playing rugby back in Australia, I still remember this guy's name. His name was Stephen Mendel. He was a phenomenal rugby player. And I was always like, why? What makes him so good? He's not that bigger physically than the rest of us. He was good physically, but not dominant physically. Why is he so good? What was his special gift that he was given that allowed him to be so much better? And the more I thought about it, he's a great guy. The more I watched him, he played on our team, and the more I studied him, even as a 12-year-old, there was nothing that jumped out physically. So what made him so good? It just never made sense to me that anyone had some special gift that was that dominant, that would separate everyone, that's how life was. Sure, there was strengths. I could see he had certain strengths, but and so that's been my lifelong pursuit of it. Just does not feel right to me that that's how it is. And the more I've studied it, there's no evidence. The science says there's no evidence that we're not born with certain gifts. So that what that says is, so they can't disprove that. They can't prove it. The science can't prove that actually exists, but the science can't disprove it, which tells me there's something there then. We just can't prove it. Freud, as crazy as Sigmund Freud was, and I apologize for those people that are fans of his, I think he did amazing things to bring psychology forward. But you go deep into some of his ideas, gets pretty warped. But one of the things he did say is that he believed everyone did come to this planet with gifts, with strengths. He called it gifts. I like to just think we have strengths. And one of the keys is finding out what they are and getting yourself in a position to utilize those. So you think about an athlete that's 6'11", that moves quick. Basketball is probably a good sport to go into. But I think that's true for all of us, Garrett, that we all have strengths, not just physically, but emotionally or intellectually, or that we all have different strengths. And I think if we think that way, we'll find where those are at. And then if we build skills on top of it, that's what I have seen over and over again in my life.
You said something that has always just resonated and stuck with me. You said, look, for them to be on the court, they all have strengths and skills, but it's the mindset that makes the champion.
Yep. That's what I've found to be true. Again, you can be 6'11" and move super great, and that gives you an advantage physically, but you don't see the work that's put in behind the scenes to develop the mental side of it too. These individuals, there's a lot of 6'11" people out there that can move and jump, but they don't work on the mental, and I've seen them come through our programs that they're barely, some of them aren't even still in the NBA. Others are super average. Then there's, and same in the tennis world, same in Red Bull,
Right.
same in all these different industries. Yeah.
And this is where you have such an advantage. That why do so many scouts struggle? They find these talented athletes, these people that have wonderful strengths, and then they don't make it.
Yeah.
Right. You're like, why did that not happen? Why did the people drafted behind them? Why were they better? And it's their viewpoint, it's their perspective, it's their mindset, it's how they operate and view everything.
So to me, it is absolutely how they operate after doing this. It is how their mind thinks. And I'm not saying that they're robots, they all think the same way. What I'm saying is here's what I've learned is they all uniquely own who they are. They all embrace who they are and work on developing their skills around who they are. So they're not all of the same, they're all different, but that is in itself a pattern. I don't know if we can break this down, if you can help me, but can you see what I'm saying? There is a clear pathway that leads to success to the human race. And that pathway is unique to each individual because everyone embraces their identity of who they are and their own unique strengths. I just came back from Abu Dhabi on a 15-hour flight, and I watched this new movie around Elvis Presley. And I'm not a musician at all. I'm so music illiterate. It's ridiculous. I was kicked out of the first music class I ever went to and shunned back in Australia. That's how music illiterate I am. But you see his story. He grew up in Memphis with some hardships in an environment where he came across Baptist music and that sort of singing and praising the Lord. And he loved that. That was something that he cared about. He was passionate about, and he was talented at it. And he walked around with his long hair and people making fun of him. And he was just being him. He was not trying to.
And they tried to change him. And he hated it, right? Yeah. And it was so frustrating.
And to the point they arrested him. They arrested him for being that. And that's why he had to go was drafted military for 2 years because and I love that scene in the movie where he's on stage at that fairground and he's like, you just got to be yourself. I think most of us are afraid in that moment to do that. So many of us are afraid to really embrace who we are. And again, I'm saying there's the two paths that don't lead to success is conforming to how everyone else wants you to be. You lose your identity and you just become average, searching for an identity then and a purpose in life. Or the other one is to try to be so unique you become almost weird. It's not about trying to be unique, and it's not about conforming. Those are both two extremes that lead to a lack of embracing who you are. Instead, it's just figuring out your strengths and who you are, then work on skills on top of that. And I've seen it in every industry. People that embrace who they are.
And this is the disease of the mind that is an epidemic that people say you should shadow, you should copy, you should model what other people do, and then you'll have the success. But the problem is you're not them. And now you're taking your lack of strengths and the things that don't compel or interest you and trying to do something through force. And it's never going to be the same result. And it always reminds me of, Henry Ford saying, if I asked the public what to do, they would have told me find faster horses. And so there's this notion of too often people are trying to only do what the marketplace gives them feedback for versus taking their strengths and paving a way that's consistent with who they are. And you're flying in the face of that modeling concept or that, just copycatting concept that so many people subscribe to their demise.
Well, I love what you said. It builds a culture. And Garrett, you just said it so well. It builds a culture of force. What that means is And that evolved out of the traditional generation, the baby boomer generation, and my generation, the Gen X generation. Doing it through force leads to aggression. Well, in order to be aggressive, there has to be passive people. And that leads to this ultra competitive environment around achievement, that you need to be the more aggressive person than everyone else, because it's a scarcity mentality and there's only so much of the pie to go around, and you've got to be more aggressive than everyone else to be successful. That just breeds this almost, dare I say, abusive environment that we live in, that we almost need to be this aggressive to conquer others. No, that's not what I found the best do. They're not interested in trying to beat down other people. They're just busy building their craft and their competency. They're often, like you say, super nice people, kind people that just love mastering what they do. And they share, like there's scenes in this new Elvis movie where he really is at a breaking point, where the Colonel and everyone's wanting him to be this robot. And he goes down to that what is it, Birch Street or something like that in Memphis. And he goes into this street and he's talking to, gosh, I wish I spent more time. I need to watch the movie again to get down everyone's names. But he goes in and he spends, it seems like he's up like almost all night. And he's just getting back to his roots of who he is and not trying to conform to what everyone else was wanting to do, and just being true.
He was like meeting with BB King or something like that.
And just the next day is whenever it was, this fairground, and he just was being true to himself. And that's what he loved the most. And that's where the passion and energy, and that's where his competency was, and just building that competency and see it. If you know who you are and you build competency, that's what makes life fun. And that's where you get paid well in this world too, if you do that.
When it's very sly and subtle, the way that this gets robbed from people. It's rarely that in business it's about censorship. It's usually about they form it like a positive word, like this is modeling, like we said, right? You model success. But what they're really saying is very censorship oriented, which is removing who you are. And to be more clear, the world is set up in what I call the consumer condition. If you consume more, you'll be happier. The more you have externally, the more you show, the more valuable you are, at the expense of who you are, often trading your time for money, hustling and grinding and sacrificing and struggling and pushing and forcing. And this is the narrative, that you have to do that to succeed. But the very nature of doing that removes success. So if someone says, I'll be happy when I win an Emmy, I'll be happy when I win a Super Bowl, I'll be happy when I get this external acknowledgement, they lose the entire joy of the process. It defeats your entire process of how you train the mind. And one of the things that you really brought to my attention at the deepest level is when you find the right work aligned with your strengths, you've already won, because the win is in the process and in the task, not the outcome. So now it's not about competition. Now it's not about reaction. It's about proactively asserting versus being aggressive to bring forth the best of who you are and find moments along the way that you're engaged in. And that's a very different process than what I had learned in the past or what society had shown or taught me. And yet you're still having people win these awards. It's just that I heard Giannis say when they beat the Chicago Bulls in the playoffs last year, he goes, we weren't beating the Bulls, we were asserting the best of who we were, or something to that nature. He was saying, again, he was moving to that proactive language. And you also diminish this notion that positive thinking is the solution, that the reality is proactive thinking is a big part of the solution. I'd love to hear how you'd articulate what I just kind of unpacked and threw in your lap there.
Yeah, I love that. And even going back to, I just want to finish that thought around Elvis for a minute and BB King. These guys were not competing with each other. They're not using force to get ahead in achievement. Like everything you're saying there is about, we're so conditioned that we have to achieve. It's about status. It's about being better than somebody else. I have not found that to be true with the best. They're not trying to be better than others. They're trying to master their own craft, and the competition is with themselves, which we've heard so many times. They're competing with who they used to be. They're not competing with other people. BB King, Elvis, they were just sharing. They're very sharing and inclusive and collaborative not using force to bulldoze over people. They love seeing other people do well. And there's that scene there, anyone that watches the movie, there's this scene there where Elvis is there watching BB King and watching these other people, loving and enjoying it, not threatened by their success. There was no scarcity mentality at all depicted in this movie. It was all an abundant mentality, not a scarcity mentality. It's all about sharing and enjoying the journey of learning to become the best version of yourself. I just love what you're saying there. And to me, it's not about so much about achievement. It's about the mastering of your craft. And the achievement just comes naturally on its own as you're working on the process and working on the skills and working on yourself to be the best version of yourself. The results actually come when you do that. And
which, by the way, is exactly my viewpoint with money, is so related to that, because most people think about investing outside of who they are, outside of their knowledge, outside of their expertise, hoping that someone else knows better than them, hoping that someone else will take care of them, hoping that this diversified portfolio will get them where they want to go. They neglect cash flow along the way, which is like the measurement of whether it's progressing, in the hopes that one day, someday it will cash flow. And the reality is, what happens if we invest in ourselves and we increase and leverage our skill sets and know our investor DNA, which is our values, our competencies, our drivers, and then accelerate that within our strengths, so that I go, someone says, well, Craig, is this a good investment? You're like, well, it depends on who you are. If it's a real estate investment, are you good at real estate or not? Are you good at trading or not? Are you good at building a business or not? And so what happens is we try to make this uniform blanket statement to the lowest common denominator of what everybody can understand, and we diminish the overall prosperity of everyone by making it overly simplistic and based in falsehood.
You'll love it. I love it. There's so many thoughts that jump out as you say that achievement idea. It's not about achievement. It's about mastering your craft and building from there. And then that creates, I want to tie that into the energy part. When you do what you love and you're building that energy, building that competency, it creates good energy. And that's where positive and negative is. Positive and negative is energy. And energy is important. That's what emotions is. Energy is important, very, very important. I don't want to ever diminish this, that positive energy is important, but we're not necessarily trying to think positive, because when you're trying to think positive, it's so artificial and fake. It's not real. Human thought, the human brain was created for us to make sense of the world, to read the world, to interpret the world accurately. It's accuracy that matters, that gives you a sense of control and safety in this world. But when you're trying to be positive, it's so fake, it creates just blind spots, which is, you think about driving on a freeway. You live in Utah, you think about driving an I-15 and you've got blind spots all around you. How scary is that? That just creates all sorts of fear and anxiety and stress in everybody's lives, because you're trying to be positive about things and not being real. Proactive is an action, and proactive creates skills. Every skill is built in the fundamentals of a skill. The very fabric of a skill is proactive in nature, which is what actually gives us direction and forward movement. Positivity is too fluffy. So we're not trying to think positive. We're trying to think proactive, or specifically, we're trying to be deliberate of thought, right?
I'm hearing what I heard in that is positivity could create delusion that's dangerous in a moment where there's blind spots.
Well said. It creates delusions and blind spots that are actually scary and creates anxiety and stress. Instead, the brain is built to see the environment around us and make predictions of what we think is about to happen. As I reach out here and pick up this cup, I'm picking it up because I can predict, as I put my fingers on it, the cup will go up. That's a prediction. That's how the brain is created. 80 to 100 billion neurons, trillions of synapses all firing. And it's an amazing tool that controls everything we do. It truly is our operating system. And if we know how to train it and to organize it and map it, just what we're capable of, human beings. And that there is fundamentally using the brain for what it's for. Just thinking positive is just such a fluffy, sugar-coated way of trying to tick off the box that you're taking care of the mental side, instead of actually developing the brain and using the brain and harnessing and channeling it to around creating quality of life, not to become more powerful or to necessarily position ourselves above other people, but to create quality of life. And again, just coming back from Abu Dhabi and Dubai, how much incredible wealth is there, but how they're sharing this wealth and inviting other people to come in and let's create a better future for civilization moving forward. Man, I hope that is really at the core of that's what they're saying, and that's what they appear to be moving towards. I would hope that they continue to authentically do that, because that's something I'm all for, that collaboration and trying to create better quality of life, right? Whereas I want to go back to your earlier, when you use force, that creates a culture of the strongest are the ones the most successful, and everyone else has to take a backseat to support the strongest one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think where you and I really align is there's traditions that turn into myths, where people just hand down these thought processes without testing, and it's worked enough that they just adopt it and they keep going with it without evolving. And it becomes comfortable, it becomes familiar. And I just chose to start asking more questions and say, is that truly the best way? And what are the other things? And, you know, you did that in a very scientific method. And it's like you've figured out this instruction manual. It's a good sized manual, but that instruction manual says, here's how to have the brain operate in a way that is going to be most effective when it counts the most, and to understand what the brain is for and the different ways that you can get the most out of it, where most people are betrayed by it because they don't know how to understand the emotions that are happening, the traditions that are handed down to them, all of the censorship that goes along. They get into a place where they just think if they hoard or hold on to, that helps, or if they just grind and work, that helps. But ultimately, there's not full optimization through all that. So you figured out this kind of way to navigate, number one. And number two, like, what can you share that's a story of a superstar or a business that was able to integrate that instruction manual, or even part of that instruction manual? Because I know when you start working with an athlete, sometimes you're 2-3 weeks in and they've gone from number 9 to number 4 or number 3. And then all of a sudden there's new things that you have to introduce, because there's only so far that will get them. And that's a pretty fast maneuver, because their software is working better now at this point.
Even one I'm trying, yes, I've got a great example there. I want to just something you said there, and I'm trying to remember to capture that thought, but it's amazing. So even it is a playbook, it's a manual of how the brain works. What's so interesting to me in all these years of studying it, it's how the brain functions. And the core of it is it's helping people function. So they're the drivers, they're the ones that are in control of their own thoughts. They're not like, wait, they're not saying to me, hey, Craig, is this right? No, it's like, you need to be the judge. You need to be the driver. You need to be the one that's controlling this. That's what's unique about it is it should be this way, that it's individual to the person. It helps people to really own their own thoughts and have their own thoughts and to be the driver of their own destiny of what they really want. So even though it's a roadmap that helps people to really learn how to be in control and be deliberate of thoughts, so that they can then be deliberate of where they go in life. So I love how you said that. So here's an example. Years ago, my mentor was working with the US Olympic downhill alpine team. I just finished my PhD. I've been coaching for years, and he brought me in to work with the aerialist group. And I met with the coach there, who I loved, ended up having a long I worked well with this coach for years. He ended up working at Red Bull and brought me into Red Bull. And so it was late in October, as you guys, everyone would know, the winter season is when they're out there doing their season. And this individual had been this great athlete that was one of their top. It's 2 years out from the Olympics. And again, with the Olympics, the first 2 years after an Olympics is where they start working on new tricks and trying to get at muscle memory. And the 2 years before, they're trying to get those old tricks dialed in to be able to execute at the Olympics. So he goes out on the World Cup tour. There's 50 on the World Cup tour from across the globe. And I'm starting to get these massive long emails, all the things of what he's not doing, massive detail, huge detail, precision of what he wasn't doing. I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy's completely spiraling on reactive thoughts. So I'm texting him, emailing him back. I don't think we even had texting back then. I'm emailing him back, trying to get him. I'm like, great, you're telling me all the things of what not to do. I don't know the first thing of what I should do. Tell me what you need to do, the 3 to 1s, as you talked about before.
Yep.
What are you doing well? Because you're only telling me what's going wrong. And so this happened for a couple of months. He ends up done, finishes 49 out of 50, retires from being an aerialist. I end up meeting with him, and I said, the US Olympic team sends me out to meet with him, and I talked through with him. I said, okay, you're in the wrong mindset. Here's the science. And I convinced him we got to get this proactive. We need to remap your brain. And one of the things I asked him, tell me your story. He's 26 at the time. Tells me when he was 16, he was this young kid, this phenom, makes the World Cup team and goes out there and wins 3 World Cup titles. And I said, well, what were your strengths? Going back to identity again, right? What were your strengths back then when you're 16? He's like, oh man, my takeoff and landing, I crushed it. I'm like, well, how good are they now? And he's like, terrible, horrible takeoffs, horrible landings. We can get worse. We think practice makes perfect. No. Practice does not make perfect at all. Practice makes permanent. And if you get in the wrong mindset, you can get worse. Tells me a story, wealthy background, makes the team at 16. Parents give him a gold card, and they go sailing. It's literally sailing around the earth, around the globe, while he just quits school and decides to go pro. I'm like, we got to remap your brain. And so I start working with him every week, and we gave him a journal, and it was just over what's working for him, what he needs to do better, constantly changing the patterns from reactive to proactive, playing to win instead of playing not to lose. No increase, no new skills. This is as I started this. 2 years out, you don't add new tricks at this point. You're just trying to get them down. So we only changed his mindset. We track how much they sleep, how much they lift, their quad strength, everything. Nothing was changed. Everything was held constant. The only thing that changed was the mindset. The following year, we're now 1 year outside of the Olympics. He goes back on the World Cup tour, ends up winning 3 world championships, 3 World Cups, and a world championship, came back number 1 in the world. That's 49 to number 1 in one season, and nothing else changed except the mindset. All we did was change his mindset from reactive to proactive. Went from 49 to number 1. He always had the skills, and there's so many stories like this. There's so many people that have worked hard that have the skills that are already there, but they're using the wrong skills. They're recalling the bad patterns instead of the good patterns. We didn't even acquire any new physical skills. We just added mental skills. And that's how good he was. Yeah, number 1, won a world championship.
So with the Olympics that you just helped coach not long ago, how many people were you working with during that Olympics?
Yeah, man, I was over 2 programs. It was 288 athletes. I was probably coaching about 12.
And that's about as high stakes as it gets, because it's like, here you go, it's this one thing.
Yeah.
And
you have to be the best of the best to represent your country. And the US is brutal because we're really good in these sports, and snowboarding mainly. And then you're competing against the best, and you get 30 seconds. You don't get like a 4-hour Super Bowl. It's so because of that, I just explaining that there's such small margin for error.
Yeah.
You've got 30 seconds to lay down 2 runs. Yeah.
How to go with those 12 athletes?
Yeah, out of 9 gold medals total, out of the 288 athletes in 20-something disciplines, 6 of them came from those 12. Yeah,
right.
Amazing.
So, I mean, I feel like we've sold the mindset thing, and look, this is one of many interviews to come. And 2 things as we running short on time here. Number 1, I listen to Bill Simmons every now and again, who's he's got the Ringer Network, and 2 different times he was talking about Giannis, saying it's like he has a fearless mind. He's fearless out there. And I just found it so ironic, because I don't know if Bill knows who you are, but that's the name of your program, is the Fearless Mind, which is just fantastic. And then the second thing is we're teaming up so that this information can get out there to the world in a way that's accessible and available, which has been pretty tough because most people are not Giannis playing at the top of their game in the NBA or the Cleveland Cavaliers, and yet you've done this for major businesses, and the business that introduced me to you has had, they've had astronomical success and growth with you coaching them. So I just appreciate you taking some time today to plant some of the seeds that we can go further. And to review, it's proactive, not reactive, is a big part. The 3-to-1, what are the 3 things that you did great, right? And what you could improve upon. And this identity concept, which, you're talking about strengths and understanding those strengths. And by the way, this isn't just you working with athletes that were already athletes. You've done this with your kids. You have kids that, you helped, that you said, you got to find what you love and you got to find your strengths. And then they went to the highest level. I mean, that's pretty amazing. I mean, we could say you were a pro tennis player, so there's got to be some genes, but the mindset that you're coaching, even when you can do it in your own family, because I feel like inside the family is a harder testing ground than outside into the world sometimes. And you've done an incredible job there.
Yeah, I agree. I love how you summed it up. Playing your strengths, helping people of all ages, young kids, doesn't matter what it is. Help find your strengths. Don't think it always has to be physical. Might be musical. It might be emotional. There's so many different areas. Find your strengths, be proactive and detailed. Yep. It's the details. It's the exactness that really matters.
All right. Well, thanks for spending some time with us today. I appreciate you. And I think this is the most compelling argument I've seen for how important mindset is. We've heard it, people talk about it, but some of the same people that talk about it tell you to model other people's success, which goes against the very nature of how the brain works and understanding strengths. And even all the books I've read before on finding your strengths or on understanding, like the way that you've precisely demonstrated it and walked me through step by step has been the most impactful. So I really appreciate you.
Love it, Garrett. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. So fun.
Hey, thanks for watching. I appreciate it. And if you're enjoying these videos, well, there's good news. More where that came from. So go ahead and click through and watch the next video now.